everyone, and welcome to Gaming Mechanics, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in gaming, how they work, why they work, and why we love them. With me this week is Anonymous Unicorn.
Woohoo! I'm not even real.
AKA Greg, who exists only in my mind.
Yeah. I think we've done enough weeks, or I think we've done several weeks where we didn't say, like, we haven't been doing the anonymous thing for long enough that we don't have to explain that it's me. And I think there's been a few weeks where I didn't actually say what my name was. And we just sounded slightly insane. But yeah, my name's actually Greg. And I do exist mostly in Mark's mind. Although, not only.
I mean, I never see you, so...
Actually very hard to confirm. More or less. This is a very special week in some ways, and a completely bog standard one in others. But would you like to describe why it's so special, Mark?
Oh, yes. Well, it's very special because this week I am coming to you as an engaged man.
He's off the market! God,
that's right.
Drop.
Oh, no.
Substantially. I know, we shouldn't even announce that. So let him hang. Let's be honest, most of this show is sex appeal, so...
It really is. I mean, yeah. I think 70 to 80% of our listeners are attractive females.
Yeah, between the age of, like, 20 and 24.
Yeah, I think so. We have statistics on that. You know who you are.
Yeah. You know who you are. No, but it's incredibly exciting. I remain on the market, so that is...
Ladies.
Yeah, ladies. But congratulations are in massive order to
Thank you.
Mark and his bride-to-be.
Thank you.
And
yes, we're quite excited. Yes.
Unless you want to say more.
No, I think we're good. I will refrain from telling the story yet again. Turns out when you get engaged, like you tell... It's funny, the day that I got engaged, we also went to go see her family. I literally lived the first 3.5 hours of that day, and then just proceeded to tell people about it for the rest of the day.
Talk about it for the next,
So, anyway, if you're thinking about getting engaged, that might happen to you.
Yeah, it really put that on, like, engagement ring, like warnings. You know, like... high potential for losing an entire day of your life to just talking about a day of your life.
Yeah, not even a day, just like a few hours of the day.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a good point.
Anyway, well, so this week, I think 3 minutes is the longest it's ever taken for us to get to a topic, so...
I know.
This week we are...
it's worth it.
It's worth it. No, it totally is. We're talking about PUBG and its counterpart that has soared to fame, Fortnite, Battle Royale. Mm-hmm. I maintain that there is some clarification that needs to be done there because people don't realize that there's another game called Fortnite. But
when we were talking about this, you literally, when you said we were talking about it in a text, you wrote Fortnite and then in parentheses BR. Yeah. And I was like, what? Like, of course it's Battle Royale. Like, why would we? I didn't even know that it was based off. Anyway, point is, yeah, it's become so ubiquitous with its rise to fame that it's just Fortnite that I wasn't even aware that it's called Fortnite Battle Royale. There was another version of Fortnite.
It's to the extent that, like, I'm thinking when they release... Because the other game, the real game, the full game, is in early access. And so it's to the point where I'm like, when they do the full release, I think they might actually have to subtitle the original game. Like,
yeah.
Because people just call Battle Royale Fortnite, and I think they're going to have to call, like Fortnite Survival or something. Like, they're going to have some sort of other title on it, because just calling it Fortnite is going to be really confusing. Fortnite, not the one you
actually want to play?
Yeah. Fortnite, the one that costs money.
Yeah, Fortnite that you don't want to, yeah.
I really want it to be just subtitled, like, Fortnite and then with a $sign.
Yeah.
Anyway, so both games have become very popular. Fortnite's actually become far more popular than PUBG. But they are similar type games. Apparently we enjoy comparing and contrasting things to PUBG because we've already done this once with Overwatch. And
yeah, but this one's way different.
Yeah.
Spoiler, they're not. They're actually kind of the same, except just different genres.
Yeah, well, that was the interesting thing, was like, I wasn't expecting another game to come out and rival PUBG so soon. At the time, it was sort of like Overwatch and PUBG were kind of the most popular first-person shooters. And now these games are far closer in terms of the way that they play and their target audience. But we'll go more into that in a second. So
Yeah, I think with Overwatch and PUBG it was more looking at two very separate phenomena in terms of these two things exploded onto the scene and seemed to have some overlap in their player base in terms of them just being large multiplayer games. Obviously, Fortnite is similar in terms of also definitely being able to be described as a phenomena, but is different in the fact that it is very much built on the core of G and is, I think, the first in a line of what I would imagine we will see being a genre.
Mm-hmm.
In large part, I mean, you can't take the success of an early access game like PUBG and then not expect other people to iterate on it and go into it. Which I think is very interesting part. I think I agree with you when you said that you were surprised by the speed of Fortnite. I think I was also surprised by, and maybe shouldn't have been because of our discussion about Overwatch, but at the fact that we didn't see it is actually a step forward for the game, right? We have the added fort mechanic, the building mechanic, but also the fact that it is an entirely different aesthetic and feel.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a PUBG plus like 1.5, where it was like another pretty straightforward military grounded, slower paced tactical game, just with different maps or maybe one or two different conceits. Fortnite is like day and night difference in terms of within the genre. It's basically as different as you can get.
Well, before we get any further into comparing and contrasting these games, why don't we summarize each one briefly for anybody who hasn't played one or the other?
Yeah, which ironically, just full disclosure, I have played actually neither of these games.
And I've played some Fortnite. Being free to play, it's a little easier to get your hands on than PUBG.
Yeah, it's also a lot easier when you have a computer.
That's true.
But yeah, that's neither here nor there. For PUBG, it's obviously there's plenty of content out there to watch and read, and kept up with it that way. And but in any case, PUBG obviously was the brainchild, or is the brainchild of. Is that a word? Brainchild?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, good. I said that and it felt very odd. But of PlayerUnknown, one of the main developers in the Battle Royale scene, or just the idea, obviously the DNA, the roots of it go back to H1Z1, DayZ, on really technically back to Arma.
Yep.
As a multiplayer experience, a survival experience, a use whatever resources you have. Same thing about H1Z1 and DayZ, are that they're both pretty gritty, realistic, down to earth, not too stylized in a lot of ways, minus the zombie mechanic. So PUBG is the evolution of that. It's PlayerUnknown getting to make his own version, basically, where he got to develop the entire thing himself. I mean, not himself, but got to direct the whole project. It is 100 players that parachute onto an island, and literally the last person who lives, or squad or duo, or I forget what the squad size is, but wins, and that's literally it. There is a mechanic that shrinks the map so that it doesn't become this never-ending stalemate. If you are outside of this shrinking area, then you begin taking damage over time, so you can only stay within it for a very short time before you die. So it just forces the players closer and closer, very quick, very elegant. And there are weapons, there's equipment, there's vehicles scattered throughout the map that you have to find. And it's forever a game of of risk management, basically, from avoiding large populated areas where there'll be a lot of resources, or not having too many resources and trying to let everyone else kill each other until the very end. Like I said, it's actually a very slow game. The firefights can be very, very quick, very brief. Like I said, it's very tactical. Mm-hmm. and extremely, extremely engaging. I mean, it's interesting to watch. It's not nearly as fun to play. It is the core, and we'll come to this in a little bit, but it's, I think, less about it doesn't bring too much on an aesthetic front or as a creative front, honestly. Particularly, it has a lot of technical issues that have been very well documented due to the fact that it is very ambitious, connecting 100 people, as well as being basically an indie game and being early access. It's not even done. That being said, the feeling that it gives players that we come back to a lot on the podcast, talking about kind of the core experience of what a game can do for you, the feeling of being either alone or just with a very small group of people against the world, basically, and particularly when it gets down closer and closer to those last few minutes of adrenaline, of excitement, is substantial. It manages to give an experience to players that is not necessarily tied to the quality or production value of the game, but more the idea itself is very pure, and hence is incredible. That's where the popularity comes from.
Would you say that it's a game that's more fun to play or watch?
Oh, definitely play.
Yeah, that's what I would think too. And it's interesting at this point to note, after PUBG came out, that the genre of Battle Royale could be accurately described as games that Brendan Green wants to make. Like, Player Unknown, he was the only person making these games.
Yeah. It's actually kind of true, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that's why Fortnite is such a big deal, actually.
Yeah.
And I think that we're seeing sort of the genreification of this style of game because it does tweak the PUBG and Arma mod and traditional Battle Royale games enough that it feels like a evolution of an established idea. And so that's what makes something start to become a genre, is if it's something that people riff off of. It's sort of
recognizable precisely as this thing that is. And it's also interesting to think. I mean, and we'll get this a sec. Sorry, how about you do the Fortnite description?
Okay, so Fortnite blasts onto the scene as Fortnite Battle Royale is a modification, actually, of a game called Fortnite, which is a sort of zombie killer mixed with an arena shooter, sort of like a Gears of War survival mode sort of thing. And it has a very, lighthearted aesthetic, more cartoony, not much of a focus on realism. The core, one of the reasons it's called Fortnite is because in the game you get to do a lot of building, and that was kind of the way that it differentiated itself from other survival zombie sort of slayers, right? Was that you could build forts, you could build traps, you could set up your premises and build walls and defend yourself. So it isn't exactly just like a Call of Duty zombies game, that had been done before. And so it's not actually all that clear that it lends itself to be an arena shooter. But after the success of PUBG, the makers of Fortnite decided that with a few tweaks to their engine, they could make it so that it actually worked just fine as an arena shooter. They basically just needed to make a big enough map. They removed the powers that the players had. So in the original Fortnite mode, the players have different abilities. And in Battle Royale, they just have items and weapons and things like that. I think that was an important thing to do to balance the 100-player Battle Royale, because if everybody had these abilities, it may have just gotten a little too crazy. And so other than that, it plays similarly to PUBG. You spawn onto a map with 100 other players, you run around, you collect items, including, in this case, resources that you can use to build walls and structures. And the last person wins or the last team wins. Basically, you just try to eliminate the other players. The zone constantly shrinks, just like in PUBG. It's similar enough that you can say it's like PUBG, but with this, or it's a Battle Royale game, but with the building mechanic. And it's done very well. It's actually done better than PUBG. I think it's the fact that it's free to play provides easy access for a lot of people who are interested in the genre. And go ahead.
And that's actually, I want to take a second to interrupt you for a sec, but I think that actually is, when we're thinking about the reasons that Fortnite potentially has stormed onto the scene so much stronger than PUBG, which, I mean, PUBG obviously is I think you could argue is maybe a more pure concept in terms of it was designed from the ground up to be just a Battle Royale game by the, creator of the genre, basically.
Right.
and Fortnite wasn't even close to that. It was, I mean, it was an entirely different game that the developers saw some potential in to be able to expand to a different mode, and obviously then that mode blew up way more than the actual game. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting that a game that, like I said, wasn't even it seems to speak to the fact that it's more about the concept than the design around the concept actually right now. And I'm not to say any game could just throw in a 100-person battle and everyone's going to play and it'll be fun. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot more thought put into PUBG in terms of the clarity of identity of the game, and then Fortnite not so much. But what you were saying, Mark, was that it was free to play, and if in fact our little hypothesis of it, the reason that people love these games being the fact that you do have, it's less about the mechanics and the structure of the game and more about the idea of being in these really intense, fun situations with 100 other people. Right. And really, truly the multiplayer aspect of it and just kind of the core idea, then it would make tons of sense that Fortnite would be more popular because, there's not even, if the core thing that's drawing people is being able to play it, and isn't necessarily the feature-rich, heavy, very simulation aspect of PUBG, then of course the free-to-play one's going to win. That just makes sense on a very basic level.
That baffled me for a little while. I'm so glad you mentioned, the conceptual integrity of PUBG is just, through the roof, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They have designed it from the ground up to be exactly what it is. In fact, they broke away from just being mods of other games so that they could make exactly the game they wanted to make. And so, exactly. From that standpoint, I can fanboy over how the apocalypse aesthetic matches the survival gritty sort of environment that you're in, and we talked about that in the Overwatch episode. And so, as a game, taken as a whole, I think it's a beautiful concept put together. It does have some bugs, and we mentioned that, but that's why I was kind of surprised of okay, this game has such a consistent presentation, and I love that.
Vision. Yeah.
But Fortnite seems almost kind of duplicitous in the way that it's presented.
Oh, totally.
Because it's this gritty survival game where everything is fun. It's weird.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? It's the same, and we talked a little bit about this on the Overwatch episode too, which I think is fascinating that we're even doing this episode again. I didn't even think about the fact that we'd done the Overwatch episode when we were talking about this, but which is, you take a Overwatch, one of their big successes was taking a brutal genre in large part and a brutal idea, which is literally just killing other people. Not unambiguously. It's not like you're stunning people in Overwatch. You're very clearly murdering them with weapons, and turning it into extremely fun, not nasty, very enjoyable experience for anyone. Taking the shooters away from obviously the early shooters. The genre of shooting was very much an adult thing that has kind of recently only broken into a far more kid-friendly area, I guess, Splatoon coming to mind, obviously being a shooter specifically for kids, Overwatch, and now Fortnite being, like you said, actually a very brutal concept, which is sort of Darwinian philosophy given to the extreme, which is literally the strongest person survives.
Right.
It's this brutal, horrible, the most dangerous game thing,
Right.
Wow, you think killing other things, the AI is fun? Literally, let's hunt some humans. It's going to be more fun, and it is. But, like you said, it's wrapped up in this bizarre package of teddy bears and sunshine, and is extremely approachable. Yeah. And I think that's another huge reason for its success over PUBG right now is that actually gritty, military, extremely realistic aesthetic is actually in games just as a whole pretty darn niche.
Yeah, that's the thing is
that when other stuff comes out, that will probably be niche again.
Well, games with conceptual integrity are really fun for people who have video game podcasts in their spare time. Or if people really like the concept that you're being true to, then you'll get a lot of players. But it only will get you so far if you have a niche concept, which I think games that are more military sims have shown themselves to be kind of a niche concept. They haven't blown up and taken over the gaming world. I mean, CS:GO is probably the biggest example of a military sim other than PUBG in the current gaming ecosystem.
Sphere. Yeah.
Yeah, but neither of them have become. Well, that's not true. CS:GO is pretty darn popular.
Yeah.
But again, that they already have. Yeah, I mean that game already has a lot of players and a lot of people following it, and that's kind of
Right.
the Overwatch. If Fortnite and Overwatch go together, so do CS:GO and PUBG. Like they're
Yeah.
very much going for the same groups of people, and it seems like there's a lot more people in the Overwatch Fortnite camp at the moment.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes back to, I mean, Blizzard is notorious for doing this, in terms of being kind of the Apple to other. I was thinking about the Apple Microsoft dynamic, right? With Microsoft being hugely technical, more so pioneering features, I believe, if I know the story correctly. I'm sure there's people that would disagree with me, but in general, Apple took ideas that had already been pioneered and then perfected them and gave them extreme usability, extreme fun, slickness, coolness, and really worked to the core of the idea and made it really very approachable and accessible for the user. Whereas Microsoft was probably more, like I said, far more technical, less user-friendly, more like engineer-friendly at first. Like you kind of get under the hood more and people like that, but far more niche. And I see a very similar dynamic with PUBG and Fortnite being a distillation of what made PUBG really successful, and then putting in a package that is far more approachable and fun. I mean, the other thing is that PUBG, like I said, is arguably, probably inarguably, one of the most successful indie games ever developed. But one, it is an indie game. Like you said, you mentioned it has some technical issues. That's kind of an understatement. There's actually some pretty extreme technical issues and bugs that have really hurt the community, and is by far the most criticized part of the game, is the fact that it is very difficult to run, if not actually impossible to run right now on full settings. But even past that, it's not a stable game. And Fortnite is not. It's developed by an entire studio, as well as I think I read that it's they're both Unreal Engine, which is also fascinating. But the guys that do Fortnite are literally the guys that developed the Unreal Engine too, or were part of that. So they have way more resources,
Right.
I think.
And they know the engine they're working with. I mean, PUBG is also working with Unreal, but they probably don't have as much expertise with that.
Experts. So anyway, it's very interesting to me that this dynamic of kind of pioneered idea with niche, and then perfected upon or iterated upon and put into a more accessible option tends to be the one that wins out. It's both free to play. Like I said, it's less. I think it's a little bit quicker, and far just brighter, more colorful. Same way that Overwatch was, the distillation of an entire genre into a cartoon. Pixar meets the tactical, battle arena online shooter.
I think your comparison between Apple and Microsoft. Well, I don't agree with all of it. I do agree.
That's spoken like a layperson.
I do agree that Microsoft, when it was sort of if it was ever overthrown by Apple, I'm specifically referring to the operating system right now, because that's a lot of what Microsoft pushed, right? Was like Windows. And I think that one of the reasons people really like Apple's OS and their user interface is because it takes a lot of things that people hated about Windows and it fixes them. In a way that Windows, ironically, has not done, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it's like, why don't you listen to your users? But I think whenever you have a game that has a lot of technical issues or pain points for people, they might still be using your game because they don't have anywhere else to go, right? In the case of Windows, that was kind of the only game in town. But as soon as you had a competitor on the scene who was willing to listen to those users and to fix the problems that those users had, a ton of people went to using iOS. And now people will only use that and they won't use Windows anymore. And so I think if you're the only game in town, it's easy to think like, oh, there are these little issues, but people don't care that much because look at all the players we have. But actually, they don't have another option. Like, of course they've stayed with you.
Yeah. I think it's also, it's very interesting to me, the dynamic of basically, as far as I know, only having two of these right now. Like I said, PUBG is with the Apple Microsoft thing, that comparison in large part is, I mean, then there's Linux, but in large part those are kind of the two dominant OSs, and there isn't another one, and that's all the market has room for.
Right.
That's not true in this case with games. I mean, there's kind of unlimited market space in some ways, at least right now, for the development of these types of games, and to continue to iterate. So I'm curious to see if a game like Fortnite, which kind of stumbled into it by accident, what if another, we're talking about the purity of what if Blizzard comes along and does a Battle Royale game, the purity of purpose.
They could make it
that PUBG had, along with the resources and aesthetic of Fortnite. Suddenly, then you have. I'm not saying Fortnite is bad in this regard, but like I said, it kind of stumbled into it more so than was built around it. So yeah, what if you had the resources and aesthetic and feeling, along with that purity of purpose that PUBG had? Then will we see, a Fortnite killer? Or is the genre topped out with Fortnite? Like,
I think it's it's a great question.
We saw something similar with the MOBAs when that started. MOBAs were a mod of RTSs, and you had Dota, and then a ton of different versions of Dota basically that came about, and then League basically nailed it, and people hopped on, and that was it until Dota 2, and now there's those two. So I wonder if we'll see a similar story from the MOBA camp.
Well, and actually, when I was looking at comparisons between Fortnite and PUBG, it really did remind me of people comparing League and Dota. Whereas Dota is a bit more technical in terms of all the little things that you can do, I guess, for lack of a better word.
It's really, really technical and really intense. Very, very, it's far less forgiving in almost every aspect.
And I would say Heroes of the Storm is on the opposite end of that spectrum. Like it's very streamlined. You don't have to worry about items.
Nope.
And
Leveling,
so
very few choices you have to make.
It's hard to know if there will be a third game like this. Like, I don't think that all of the little niches are filled. I still think there might be room for maybe an in-between. I'm trying to think of it in this analogy if Fortnite is more of a Heroes of the Storm or if it's more of a League of Legends.
Yeah, hard to say.
But I will say, so going into more specific differences between the games, we've mentioned the building mechanic briefly, and I think this has huge implications actually for the game, the building mechanic, because anybody who watches Fortnite or plays it and has played PUBG will realize that Fortnite is quite a bit faster and less careful. And it's hard to actually, like, if you think about PUBG and somebody were to say to you, okay, I want a game like this, but I want people to be more aggressive. I think your natural inclination would be like, do a Halo style, like you get health regen, maybe you've got like extra shields, weapons maybe don't do as much damage.
Multiple lives.
And then it just becomes like a giant Halo match, right? Like, we've done that before, and it's been explored, and it doesn't feel like PUBG anymore. So I would say that isn't really just speeding up PUBG. That's kind of taking away the tactical aspect of it. And so, and you could argue that Fortnite still kind of gets rid of the tactical aspect of it, but it does it in a really unique way, and I think it's with the building mechanic. Because you literally, and I felt this, the very first game that I played Fortnite, I always felt safe, even in the open, because I could always build a wall in front of myself. And being able to take cover with you in a shooter is huge. Because now you're not bound to sneaking around walls, hiding behind boxes, like, trying to get cover in valleys or hills. If you want a hill, just build a staircase. There you go.
And being too scared to move. I mean, that's very not uncommon at all in PUBG.
Right.
That's a really interesting point. That not only is it like a new kind of like system, it actually like really gets at. It's a deeply fundamentally changing system, right? It particularly for the genre of shooting, where like you said, like being able to take cover with you is such an intrinsically important part of shooters, and being able to like interact with that whole side of it, which you normally can't, you have to work around it. is changes not only just like, hey, there's like this one new system, it like works backwards and changes the way you think about everything else too.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
And the building mechanic, it definitely allows cover, but it is so much broader than just like having a riot shield, right? Which is like,
Right.
okay, that would also be having bringing cover with you. But the building mechanic, it also, I think it has the effect of eliminating a lot of the advantage of verticality in the game. So like in PUBG, if you claim a hill or the top of a building, that's a pretty big deal because now you have a vantage point and you can shoot at other people who are trying to run into the safe zone or whatever.
Yeah, huge.
And verticality is still a big deal. It is in any shooter. We've talked about why on our 2D goes 3D episode on shooters, but in Fortnite you can always go higher than the other person. So in that way, it kind of eliminates the advantage of like climbing a hill and claiming it as your own. It's like, oh, well, somebody just built a tower next to your hill, and now they're on the same, plane as you. They're at the same
Right.
height.
If part of the reason that verticality is such a advantage is because there's such a high premium on it, and it's a very limited resource in most other shooters. Suddenly, when you take away that scarcity, then it doesn't become as valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
Some basic econ for you. Didn't expect that in this episode, did you? Sneaked.
So the supply of height is increased.
Yeah. Is the weirdest way to communicate that. But it's true. I stand by it. I think it's a good analogy.
Yeah.
But something becomes less special when everyone's super. No one will be.
When everybody's up in the air, nobody.
When everyone's
is.
vertical, no one is.
I don't think that works.
Shepard and I, another one of our mutual friends, talked about how that saying when everyone's super, no one will be, might be the only that version of that saying is the only one that works. Like there's no other way to say that. Like, yeah, when everyone's tall, no one will be. It's like no, everyone's just still tall.
That's true.
When everyone, yeah. Anyway. We're getting off the lines here.
Yes.
What were we talking about? PUBG.
Yes, we're talking about PUBG and the building mechanic.
I forgot to do this one.
And, okay, so another thing that I think is quite different between the two is that PUBG, they put a lot of work into setting up the inventory system in a way that is sensible and flexible and very realistic. Fortnite definitely streamlines this, though, and the inventory management system is quite a bit simpler and much more approachable, frankly. And I think that might also be something that allows the game to be more approachable.
Yeah. What's the map situation with Fortnite?
So
I don't know.
With Fortnite, I think there is only one map.
Okay.
I have only ever played or seen
the inclusion of the
one
desert map was a huge piece of.
Right. PUBG now has more than one map.
Right. That was a huge thing that a lot of people are clamoring for, as well as was quite controversial because turns out it might be one of those things where it's more similar to CS:GO or League of Legends, where you really only need kind of one map,
right?
To standardize, you need to standardize something basically because there's so much complexity in the system,
right?
Otherwise, and so the desert map has been quite controversial in terms of its design, as well as just if it's good or not, or what people are asking for, and yada yada yada. I think that's just a inherent problem with early access and players basically playing the game during its development is that suddenly they now have a huge voice in the development of the game, which can make it a lot harder. I mean, it can be good and bad, right? You have immediate mass feedback, which is something that's very, very, very good for development. But at the same time, you also have, 20 million angry people trying to steer this game, which doesn't work either. There's a reason we don't develop like that.
Exactly. Development by democracy.
It is interesting to note that Fortnite only has one.
Yeah. Well, and I think that puts a game in a weird position. We've talked about this before, but if you only have one of something, then like adding another one is a huge deal. Like if PUBG came out with 3 maps and they added a 4th map and people didn't like the 4th map, you would fully expect them to tweak. They would tweak the 4th map and then they would still add it because it's like, well, it's just a new map to get used to. But if you only have one map, adding another one is like it's a paradigm shift. It's like, can the map change or can't it? Because that's the question that you're answering.
Yeah, it's 100% more game in some ways. And, it's like an entirely you're functionally doubling the amount of game that you're trying to give. And yeah, it's a good point. It's a proof of concept too. It's like, can this actually be transferred to a different location? Yeah, or did we somehow stumble upon a system that only worked in one place?
Yeah, or there's just too much community buy-in and people just don't, they don't want to have to learn a new map. I mean, especially if the game that you've made already has a high enough learning curve, then adding in another map might just tip it over the edge, where new players just can't get into it because there's already so much to learn, and now they have to learn a new map.
I was just about to say that, actually. I wonder if there is, and obviously Fortnite only has one, so this is just a inkling of an idea. But if there is something that goes into that purity of design purpose, like we were talking about with PUBG being built from the ground up, that because it was built on just one map, if it's so fine-tuned and so specific and so, kind of razor-thin edge of playability, that niche we were talking about, if that actually makes it harder to expand to different maps because it was only designed on this one thing and it was so carefully designed and curated, that it would actually be very difficult to expand that, as opposed to something that was maybe more broad and more a concept and idea, that would be easier to expand to different locations or different maps. And particularly for the battle genre, for the genre itself, you don't have this problem quite as much with other games, like with RTSs or... actually, it really might be it. Because you do have that problem. I'm trying to think of other large multiplayer experiences. But other, like more traditional online shooters, in terms of Call of Duty or their Titan or Battlefield. Obviously, all those have tons of different maps, and people are fine with that.
I actually think that it's kind of weird to have a first-person shooter that doesn't have multiple maps. I mean, even a really massive shooting sim like Battlefield had several maps. And I think that...
It definitely seems to imply that there's something more to the genre, the idea of the 100-person Battle Royale, far more than the... I mean, I think a big part of it, too, is the fact that you only have the one life part,
That's true.
In other games, maps are designed to bring the players together. Like, in those fighters, those maps are designed to bring people together to kill each other and to fight each other. That's not the point of a map in PUBG, right? That's the point of... They had to literally add an entire system, which was the shrinking dynamic, to encourage players to do that. It's not, by definition, the map design. In fact, the map design is probably quite the contrary. It has to be big enough to allow everyone to do something and not just immediately kill each other and die, and that's the end of the match,
Yeah, it's a very... that would be an interesting discussion of, like, active versus passive map design. But I think that PUBG can get away with a much more passive map design. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot less, a lot more cover, a lot less sort of vantage points from which you can see people, a lot less aggressive weapons that you can use at long ranges.
Getting a sniper in PUBG is a huge deal, right? That's kind of the golden standard for weapons, because the game's built around very quick. I mean, it's based around advantage, about in the same way that in real life you want as much distance between you and the stuff that can hurt you as possible, and you want to be able to hurt them from that far,
right? And
very precisely, and that's basically a sniper rifle. So,
and the map on PUBG is pretty hilly, so you're not going to get like line of sight across the map, like
right.
You can get like from one valley to the next, from one hill to the next, you might be able to see, but that's about it.
Yeah. And Fortnite what's Fortnite's map like then in that regard? I mean, it even talking about maps again with the building mechanic in Fortnite, they do give all of this. I mean, all of this goes out the window a little bit, right? Because the map design itself has to be able to accommodate people changing the map.
Yes, exactly.
Fundamentally.
So one of
really
the things...
less about the map design and more about the space in which people can be. It just basically adds in a new element to the gameplay.
Well, so all buildings are destructible in Fortnite. In fact, pretty much everything is destructible except for, like, the terrain. And so I would say that's a much more aggressive map design, because if you don't like, that building over there, you can just get rid of it. Like, if you don't want somebody taking cover in a specific place, then you can make sure that they don't. But they also, everybody takes their cover with them. So, like, I think that, let's just talk about dimensions first. The PUBG map is much bigger than the Fortnite map.
Right.
And I would say the Fortnite map has much more aggressive mountains and hills. So you'll have really sheer cliffs in the Fortnite map. You won't have that as much in PUBG. It'll be more like sloping hills and things, and that's to, I think, allow more accessibility from any direction. If you had a sheer cliff in PUBG, now that is extremely good cover for whoever's on that cliff, because nobody's coming from that direction.
Yeah, that's
in
a good
Fortnite, even if you have a sheer cliff, someone could still build a staircase up the sheer cliff and come that way. So it doesn't give you, it doesn't give you perfect cover like a sheer cliff in PUBG would.
That's a good point. It's a really good point. The stuff outside of your control. I mean, they actually had to necessarily limit the amount of advantage that could be taken by things that are outside of your control in PUBG, because otherwise it'd just be the person that gets to this place first. As opposed to when that actually is a player dynamic and you have some control over that in Fortnite, that you don't have to be nearly as careful in terms of its design.
If this building has too many windows, well, then build a couple walls. Like, you can fix any problem with the terrain.
Interesting. I wonder if that's part of it. I mean, we were talking about kind of the nicheness of PUBG and how Fortnite, but I wonder if there's even, I mean, obviously the building dynamic is the big, huge difference, but I wonder if that really is part of the secret. So, I mean, outside of just it's something new and fresh, and obviously it's well implemented and fun, but if that even might be something more, even more fundamental to the design of these types of games, where you have that kind of control, that does make it far more aggressive and fast paced, and I think in a lot of ways more fun. That's one of the big problems with, like I said before, with PUBG, you have one life, right? And so you have to be extremely careful with it. Same thing in Fortnite. But you have all these different other things that you can do to preserve that, or to interact with the fact that you only have one life, as opposed to being able to respawn endlessly. And that I wonder if that is one of the huge key, when you think about like the pillars of the Battle Royale genre, is like, you hit YOLO, basically. And there's tons of people. That's pretty much the two main things you need. So if you institute a system that allows you to interact with one of those pillars even more fundamentally, which is like kind of being able to build things or cover things or preserve your own life in a different way, or think about that problem in a different way, then that system, you just get so much mileage out of. It's not just like adding a new weapon where it's like, okay, here's this one new thing that doesn't change the entire experience. It's you have an entire new way of thinking about the problem, which is you only live once. So I wonder if they basically got lucky and stumbled on actually not just like a fun new system, but like a incredibly new system.
Yeah, it would seem like it, right? I mean, based on the number of people who are moving. I don't know if they're moving to that game, honestly. I don't have statistics on that, but I do know that people who weren't playing PUBG are playing Fortnite.
I think it's both.
But I also wonder if there is part of like, you do have much more control over your situation in Fortnite. Like, if you don't have cover, it's sort of your fault. And I wonder if there is an element of just the things that you need to learn in Fortnite are just a bit more obvious than the things you need to learn in PUBG. Like, to do well in PUBG, like, you kind of need to learn military tactics, right? Like, it's pretty subtle stuff. Like, it's like, how does your profile look against this wall versus against a tree, right? Like,
totally. Yeah, people, and that is very much talked about. That's not like an exaggeration. That's very much the way people talk.
If you go into out in the open, if the backdrop at which you're being shown against doesn't contrast very much with your clothing, then you're much less likely to be shot at than if you're walking and somebody sees you silhouetted against the sky, right? That would be like worst case scenario. So like, these are the sorts of things you've got to talk about and think about in PUBG. Nobody is thinking about that in Fortnite, because you're broadcasting your position all the time, because you're building actual forts at your position. So it's like, it's not very subtle most of the time. And so I think
that's, I mean, like I said, I think that's a niche thing.
And I think Yeah, it is. But also, like, what you need
Subtlety
to...
is not what I'd say most people play games for.
Yeah. And so there's an element of, like, making learning obvious, I think, in Fortnite that
Yeah.
helps it be more approachable to all sorts of players. Because when you make a mistake, I think it's not as hard to know, oh, here's where I went wrong. Like, it's not
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
I got picked out of nowhere by a sniper. I really don't know what I could have done about that.
well, that's one of the problems with any hugely technical game. I think in general is that it's it's similar to say like StarCraft, right? Where if you jump into online StarCraft without knowing anything other than just like kind of the basics of how to play the game, you'll just get murdered immediately, and you won't understand why.
Right.
And there's so much to learn on the back end. And similarly, like I could describe to you like the controls of PUBG and what you need to do. If you had no idea what like the meta of the game was or how the game developed or how it's meant to be played, you would probably die very quickly, and you wouldn't even understand why. I think that is just kind of inherent to not, which is not as true in like Overwatch, right? Like that was one of the beauties. I think we even talked about that, or at least Xander and I did when we started playing it. Was that you really almost literally could describe to someone the character abilities and baseline teach them how to play the game, and they actually immediately jumping into that game and being able to play it, even if you're dying and losing. And there's probably some extent of like you wouldn't really understand why the match was going the way it was or not. But in general, you have a pretty darn good understanding of what you were doing and your part in it, and
Right.
And what you could do better.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think people really don't like arbitrary deaths, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they don't like them. We know that they don't like them in single player games. But I think it
Right.
applies to multiplayer games too, that you will turn away a certain portion of your player base if they feel like their deaths, they don't have control over them. And
And I wonder too. This is more just curiosity, but in terms of numbers of people that play PUBG, obviously it's gotten popular and remained very popular. It's not like it was just a fad or anything. But I wonder what the numbers of people are that get like how long they stick around, basically, right? Like how giving it a shot and playing a few games and probably experiencing, like I said, that massive adrenaline rush that comes with the game that is obviously very addictive and very fun and desirable. But how many of those do you get versus the 10 other times where you just kind of die out of the blue and you're what's the ratio there that needs to happen before someone's like, yeah, this is fun, but like, oh, I have other things I can invest time. How long can you? What's the half life on a player for PUBG versus? I would imagine that actually be much shorter on Fortnite. If what we're saying is true, like it's more clear why things happen the way it is, or that what you want to have happen with a failure state in a game is the player learns from it and wants to try again, so they don't do the same thing. And like
Exactly.
it should, in theory, drive the player on to do it again. If in Fortnite you like get killed and you're like, oh, I like obviously crap, like oh, if I only hadn't done this, then you want to go back in and do it again and not make that mistake again and correct it. If in PUBG you get killed and you're like, okay, like,
uh-huh.
all right, I guess we'll just give it another shot, like, without learning anything or knowing what I would do differently. That's way less engaging and certainly less fun.
Yeah. And I think it will make your game appeal to an older audience too, right? Like,
Yeah.
I just don't expect a 14-year-old to sit there and reflect on their demise in PUBG and what they could have done differently. I'm sure there are some 14-year-olds that do that, but I think it's way more likely in a game like Fortnite where what you did was much more obvious and you don't actually have to think about it that long. It's like, oh, so like don't go loot a body right after I kill somebody because everybody knows where I am. Like, you'll do that precisely like twice, and then you'll never do it again because it's just really obvious that that's a good way to die.
Yeah. Interesting. The other thing I think that is by far the most important piece that we haven't mentioned as we wrap up here is the fact that they both come from the zombie genre.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Say more about that.
It's not that huge. It's actually not notable almost at all, except for that one sentence I said.
Okay.
But,
well, I was wondering where you were going with that because I was like,
I actually didn't have anything. Other than the fact that it's weirdly just in passing.
So
Like
I do think there's
trivia on Wikipedia.
An interesting connection to what we've talked about before, right? So the Battlefront games, we've talked about how turning all of the NPCs in that game into players was a step backward for the genre. And the reason it was a step backward is because your core experience to Battlefront was being a bit better, a bit more skilled, and a bit more powerful than all of the units around you. And so you felt like even though you were one unit in literally hundreds, you could make a difference in the tide of this battle because you were kind of a better, stronger unit. Well, actually, if you flip that formula and you turn all those NPCs into player-controlled characters, you get something much more like a Battle Royale, right? Much more like PUBG or Fortnite. Now, so Battlefront actually moved in the direction of a game like PUBG or Fortnite, and I think the reason that it isn't fun, though, is because it didn't realize it was doing that, and it's not set up like a Battle Royale game. It's set up like a giant game of Halo or something.
Yeah. Yeah, very much missed the point, I think. I think that was an example of them being like, people want... It'd be great to be able to put on the box and advertise like 40-player multiplayer, just like bigger is better, basically. But the game at core wasn't designed around that philosophy, actually, on how to have fun and make large amounts of people interact online, basically. Is far more... I mean, yeah, there's a lot that's been said about Battlefront and the new ones that we don't need to beat a dead horse too many more times on, but the design philosophy was very clearly not, how can we make this a very pure online experience? It was far more, let's cash in on Star Wars and some things that we know will work and people will like, and then make a lot of money off of it. So, I think it's a great point. Similarly with, like, say, Call of Duty or Battlefield. Battlefield does big, huge open battles. That's different, though, because, in my opinion, at least, that was what that game was built on. It was similar. Like, the original Battlefields were very much about being able to have these massive, huge maps and all kinds of different ways to play them, and people getting into that kind of know that. It's not supposed to be as arcadey as Call of Duty, and they've basically stuck with that formula over time, and it's not like they just had a formula and then just made it huger, made it bigger.
Right.
In the same way I feel like Battlefront did. And there was always the formula, right?
There is a parallel to Battlefield for like a more cartoony sort of world. I would say PlanetSide would fit well with Battlefield in terms of these very large-scale, vehicle-heavy tactical battles where map control is much more important than something like PUBG or something like Battlefront. Well, certainly like Overwatch. I mean, so I do think there are parallels there. It's weird that like Battlefront has kind of fallen into this no man's land where they tried to combine like the rapid respawning and loadouts of something like COD and Halo, but they also have like a massive number of people in a game. I'm just trying to figure out like why has Battlefront not managed to fall in one of these?
Why did that mix of multiplayer shooter not work as well?
Right, because like there are so many different little niches of first-person shooters in big maps with a lot of people. Like I would say Battlefront and PlanetSide kind of occupy a very different space than Fortnite and Battle Royale, which is very different than Overwatch and Team Fortress and those games. And so there are some very like tried and true formulas that you can fall into, but Battlefront just appears to have avoided all of them and gotten the worst of all worlds.
It took a lot of skill to dodge everything that we knew actually worked.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like.
No, that's an interesting question. And particularly, I mean, I wonder if at Core 2, just as a thought experiment, if you took Battlefront's, obviously the two new ones, and literally stripped it all down, made the exact same modes, but just eliminated the multiplayer aspect and made everyone else CG or everyone else AI, if that would be fun to play. I literally have no idea. I wonder if it might be though, because that's in large part what the original Battlefronts were. I wonder if it's that simple.
Here's an idea, Greg.
They were
Star Wars Battlefront Battle Royale.
Yeah. Oh
Ship it. Yeah.
I mean, that was basically what they tried to do.
If you're listening.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what they did. To a small extent. I mean, honestly, again, minus the one life thing.
Right.
But trying to blow up into trying to figure out. I think there's this inherent problem with trying to figure out how to make lots of people interact online and have it be fun for everyone.
Right.
Because just the more people you have, the more the people who are better rise to the top, and that's just inevitable. And then if you eliminate respawns, then you suddenly make the game extremely cutthroat. And but yeah, I wonder if, like you said, Battlefront did fall into this little middle ground where you have tons of people, and there's something inherent about that isn't as fun when you have these, like you said, those quick respawn timers, the kind of arcade-based shooting, very simple systems.
Well, it's interesting. You said that the respawn might actually make it less fun for people. I'm not sure. I'm actually starting to lean toward the idea that having a respawn mechanic in a game that is designed to winnow away the bad players is actually no fun at all. Because what happens is you respawn, and guess what? You're still the worst player on the map, and you die again. And so it's like
that feeling of dying without any knowledge or reason or purpose to it, having the failsafe be not fun, just gets repeated over and over. So instead of having to play 10 games to get that state 10 times, you can do that in one game and then you're done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, the arbitrary failures are now compressed, and it becomes really unpleasant.
Extremely negative experience and extremely... That's interesting.
Well, we have gone a little bit on a tangent here, but hopefully you enjoyed our survey of first-person shooting and kind of the
state of multiplayer.
Yeah, exactly. So we will be back next week. Not sure what we're going to be discussing yet, but we're going to try to do things that are relevant to the current gaming sphere as this episode was. So.
Yeah, totally. And this is kind of a return to form to before, really kind of before last fall, when we were, in large part, doing more just kind of the discussions Mark and I would have anyway. And then recording them as opposed to highly structured out themes. So I'm curious, actually, which people like more. I think they're both really enjoyable for us. So yeah, leave a message for us in all the usual places, if you so desire, and we will see them, and certainly react accordingly. So, until next week, I hope you guys all have a wonderful end of February.
Yeah, Valentine's Day is over, man. It's this weird gap where there's no holidays coming up.
Exactly. Yeah. I guess the Olympics are still happening, so go watch those because they're pretty cool.
America. All right. Bye, guys. Whenever you're ready.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, I wish you all a very happy end of February and the end of the Olympic Games. Go watch those. They're very fun. And in the meantime, I hope you guys take care, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter @GamingMechanics or our Facebook by going to facebook.com/GamingMechanics. Thanks for listening.